They say the most terrifying monsters are the ones that walk among us. You might pass them on the street, stand next to them in an elevator, or even buy them a drink, and never know the darkness hiding behind their eyes. Tonight, we have 3 stories about encounters like that, encounters with killers that people, by all logic, should not have survived. Story 1. In 2015, I unknowingly crossed paths with a serial killer who targeted women alone at night. I didn't know his name, or what he had already done. I only knew one thing. I wasn't supposed to survive. My name is Alyssa Carter, and I was 24 years old when this happened. At the time, I was living in Portland, Oregon, and working late shifts at a hotel right in the heart of downtown. To save a bit of money, I always parked in a garage across the street. It was on the 5th floor, which was always empty, always a little creepy, but always cheap. One night, around 11:40 p.m., I finished my shift and started my usual walk to the garage. The street was quiet, the air was cool, everything felt completely normal. I walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the 5th floor, and waited for the doors to close. Just as they were about to meet, a hand slid between them, forcing them back open. A man stepped into the elevator with me. He was tall, and he was wearing a heavy, hooded jacket, which was strange because it was a warm night. His eyes immediately found mine. He didn't glance at the buttons or look around. He just stared at me. It wasn't a friendly look, or even a curious one. It was the kind of look that makes every instinct in your body scream at you to run. The elevator doors slid shut, and we began to ascend. He didn't press a button. My heart was pounding so hard I couldn't move, so neither did I. The elevator chimed, and the doors opened on the 5th floor. He turned to me and smiled. It wasn't a real smile, just a small, unnerving twitch at the corner of his mouth, as if he knew something terrible that I didn't. "Ladies first," he said, his voice low. I stepped out of the elevator slowly, my body stiff with fear. The entire floor was deserted. My car was the only one in sight, parked under a flickering fluorescent light at the far end. I could hear his footsteps right behind me, each one perfectly in sync with mine. He wasn't rushing me, and he wasn't trying to be quiet. He was just following. My hands were shaking as I fumbled in my bag for my keys. When I finally pulled them out, they slipped through my fingers and clattered onto the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the silent garage. He stopped walking. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, very quietly, he said, "Don't rush. We have time." Every nerve in my body lit up. A wave of pure terror washed over me, but I knew that panicking would get me killed. I had to do something, so I left my keys on the ground. I turned around to face him as calmly as I could and said, "My boyfriend is meeting me up here. He should be here any second." The man's chilling smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed just a little. He glanced over my shoulder toward the ramp leading up from the lower floors, as if he was actually checking to see if someone was coming. In that exact moment, a car engine roared to life from the ramp below. Headlights cut through the darkness as a vehicle made its way up to our level. It was the security guard making his nightly rounds. The guard pulled up beside us, his windows rolled down. The man took one quick step back, his eyes darting from me to the guard. Then, without a word, he turned and walked the other way, disappearing between the concrete pillars into the shadows. The security guard asked if I was okay. I tried to nod, but I was shaking so badly he could see something was wrong. He insisted on escorting me to my car and waiting until I was safely on my way. When I finally got home, I tried to convince myself it was just a creepy guy, a close call. I tried to brush it off. But the next morning, my attempt at denial was shattered when the police showed up at my apartment complex. They showed me a photograph. It was him. His name was Devin Hawley, and he was a serial killer wanted in 3 different states. His pattern was always the same. He targeted women who were alone at night, always in isolated places like parking garages, stairwells, and dark alleys. The police had received a tip that he had been seen just 2 blocks from my workplace about an hour before my shift ended. Then, one of the detectives said something that made the room spin. If your security guard had been 30 seconds later, you probably wouldn't be here. I never used that garage again. I quit my job and never worked another night shift. And even now, years later, I still hear his voice in my head sometimes, replaying those terrifying words over and over. Don't rush. We have time. This next story sounds fake, but according to the bartender who told it, 2 killers literally met each other in a dive bar at 2 a.m., and somehow it turned into the strangest night he's ever witnessed. This all went down in 2007 in a tiny, dusty roadside bar in Texas called the Rusty Cactus. It was the kind of place only locals went to, truck drivers, lonely travelers passing through, and some of the drunkest cowboys you could ever imagine. The bartender, Jeremy, had seen his fair share of weirdness, but nothing like this. It was 1:50 a.m., just 10 minutes before closing time. The bar was completely empty except for Jeremy and one lone customer, a quiet, creepy-looking dude in a faded denim jacket. Jeremy had privately nicknamed him Denim Guy. He'd been coming in for a few nights, and he never talked, never smiled. He just sat at the bar, drinking whiskey like it was water. Then, at 1:55 a.m., the door creaked open and another man walked in. This guy was tall and wearing dark sunglasses, even though it was the middle of the night. Jeremy immediately labeled him Sunglasses Guy. He walked right up to the bar and sat down in the stool right next to Denim Guy. He ordered a beer. The 2 men sat in silence for a moment, staring at each other's reflections in the mirror behind the bar. It looked like they were sizing each other up, scanning for weaknesses. Then Sunglasses Guy broke the silence, his voice calm and even. "Rough night?" he asked. Denim Guy took a slow sip of his whiskey and replied, "Not rough. Busy." A smirk played on Sunglasses Guy's lips. "Same." Another long, heavy pause hung in the air. Jeremy, who was bored, tired, and ready to go home, decided to try and make some small talk. "So, what do you guys do for work?" Both men turned to him and spoke at the exact same time. "Private contractor." They looked at each other again. The air grew thick with another uncomfortable silence. Then, Sunglasses Guy raised his glass in a toast. "To late night work." Denim Guy clinked his glass against the other man's. "To clean jobs." Jeremy started to feel genuinely uncomfortable. The way they were talking, it was like watching 2 movie villains testing the waters, speaking in a code he couldn't quite decipher but knew was bad. A few more minutes passed in silence. Then Denim Guy casually leaned in and asked, "Ever get messy?" Sunglasses Guy didn't hesitate. "Sometimes. But I'm efficient." They stared at each other for another long moment, and then they both started laughing. Not a small chuckle, but a full-on deep-bellied laugh that echoed through the empty bar. Jeremy had no idea what was happening or what he was supposed to do. Just before closing time, the 2 men stood up, shook hands like they were old friends, and walked out of the bar together. Jeremy locked up as fast as he could. When he walked out to the parking lot, he saw them standing by their cars, still talking under the dim lights. Suddenly, a police cruiser turned onto the road, its headlights sweeping across the parking lot. In an instant, both men froze. They stared at the cruiser, then they stared at each other. And without a single word, they both sprinted to their cars, jumped in. and sped off in opposite directions, tires screeching on the asphalt. Jeremy was completely baffled. But the next morning, he was watching the local news, and a report came on that made his blood run cold. The police had been searching for two unrelated, wanted killers who had both been spotted in the area. The news anchor said police believed the two men had almost crossed paths. Jeremy just shook his head and muttered to himself, "Buddy, they crossed paths all right. And they bought each other drinks." Story 3. In 1999, 4 police officers responded to what they thought was a routine break-in. Instead, they walked into the home of a man who had been hiding from law enforcement for years. And he wasn't planning on going quietly. It happened in Flagstaff, Arizona, during a violent storm one night in November. Rain was hammering against the roofs and lightning lit up the sky every few minutes. A concerned neighbor had called 911 to report seeing someone moving around inside a house on the street that was supposed to be empty. 4 officers were dispatched to the scene: Officer Grant, Officer Lewis, Officer Rodriguez, and Officer Danielson. When they arrived, they found the front door unlocked. They pushed it open and stepped into complete darkness. The only sound was the storm outside and something else. Heavy, rhythmic breathing coming from down the hallway. Officer Lewis drew his weapon and whispered into the darkness, "Flagstaff PD, come out with your hands up." There was no response. Just the sound of slow, heavy footsteps moving deeper into the house, away from them. The officers spread out, forming a tactical line, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness and sweeping across peeling wallpaper and furniture covered in dusty sheets. Then a voice echoed from the end of the hallway, a voice that was eerily calm. "You're too late." A man stepped into the beam of Officer Grant's flashlight. He was tall and gaunt, with wide, unblinking eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. Officer Danielson recognized him instantly. It was Evan Cross, a fugitive who was the primary suspect in multiple disappearances from years earlier. No one had seen or heard from him since 1994. Officer Grant kept his voice steady. "Evan, it's over. Let's end this calmly." Evan just tilted his head like a predator hearing a strange, new sound. Then he smiled, a smile that was far too wide for his face. "You brought 4. Good. Makes it interesting." And then he ran. But not away from them, toward the back of the house. He ran toward them. The officers immediately tried to contain him, shouting commands, blocking his paths, and forcing him into the living room. He moved with a shocking speed and agility, knocking over furniture and using the flashes of lightning from the windows to dart between shadows. The entire house became a chaotic maze of dark corners and flickering, disorienting light. Officer Rodriguez nearly had him cornered in the dining room, but Evan slipped past him like a ghost, leaving the officer breathless and empty-handed. Finally, they managed to trap him in the kitchen. 4 flashlights pinned him against the far wall, 4 officers surrounding him with nowhere to run. Officer Grant raised his voice over the storm. "Don't make us escalate this." Evan's chest rose and fell slowly as he looked each of the 4 officers in the eye, one by one. His breathing was heavy, but he wasn't out of breath. "I was hoping for more officers," he said. He lunged. The officers reacted instantly, and after a brief, intense struggle, they managed to restrain him. Miraculously, no one was seriously hurt. No shots were fired. It was over in seconds. As they were cuffing him, Officer Danielson noticed something disturbing on the kitchen wall behind where Evan had been standing. Scratched into the paint were dozens and dozens of tally marks, arranged in neat rows. He leaned in closer, his flashlight beam illuminating the strange markings. Evan, seeing him looking, let out a low chuckle. He whispered, "Those aren't victims. Those are the nights I survived, waiting for someone to come for me." In that moment, the officers realized the chilling truth. Evan Cross hadn't just been hiding in that house. He had been waiting. He had been preparing for this confrontation for years. Evan Cross was taken into custody without further incident. The officers involved still talk about that night, about the storm, the dark house, and how one man seemed ready and willing to fight a dozen cops if he had to. But the thing that scares them the most, the detail that still haunts their nightmares, is that when they finally cornered him, he didn't look afraid at all. He looked excited,